Good morning.
Good morning, Amy.
I'm not sure who opened the meeting. I think it was Batya. Could you please make me the host of the meeting?
How?
All right, well, I'm honored to chair this AJS 2020 session on uses and abuses of art in representations of Holocaust violence. We're fortunate to have three excellent presenters who will address these issues from the perspective of literature, art, and music. Each presenter will have 14 minutes, much too short a time for such important papers, but these are the realities of the situation we're living through, a virtual conference. And we all look forward to a normal conference next year. The presentations will be followed by comments by our respondent, Rosemary Horowitz, and then there will be a question and answer period. Hopefully we'll have enough time for that. Please send your questions and comments to my chat. We must end this session at 1:45. I will keep my introductory remarks very short in the interest of time. So our first presenter is Rachel Brenner. Rachel is professor of Jewish Studies and Modern Hebrew Literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has published widely on responses to the Holocaust in diaspora literature, Israeli literature, and Polish literature. Her latest book is Polish Literature and the Holocaust, Eyewitness Testimonies, 1942-1947, which was published in 2019. She will discuss today literary responses to the Holocaust, the continuing Polish hostility toward Jews, as reflected in the works of Sofia Kozak-Szuska and Stanislav Rembeck. It is a complex issue for Poles in general, but specifically for the Polish Catholic Church. A challenging and very interesting look at our session's topic. Next, we will hear from Batya Brutin, all the way from Israel. She's research associate at the Chair for Holocaust Research at Bar-Ilan University. She is an art historian focusing on art during and after the Holocaust. She has written extensively on the topic, and her most recent book is Holocaust Icons in Art, The Warsaw Ghetto Boy and Anne Frank, which was published this year. The title of her presentation today is Violated: Jewish Women During the Holocaust in Visual Arts. She will focus on two subjects concerning violence on women: shaving women's hair and dressing them in striped prisoner uniforms, and then depicting sexual violence against women during the Holocaust. It certainly is another very challenging subject for discussion. And last, as I said, not least, Teryl Dobbs, professor and chair of music education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, will talk about music as violence, the musical experience of Dachau. She presents her scholarship nationally and internationally and has published widely. Her chapter on location and trauma, musical experience in the Holocaust, will appear in the forthcoming book, Trauma and Resilience in Music Education, Haunted Melodies. She teaches undergraduate courses in music education and graduate seminars in music education and music in violence and genocide. I really look forward to hearing these stimulating presentations, which I know are just small parts of your big papers. So Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for organizing this panel. And now, okay, and okay, can you see it? Everybody can see it?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Michlean and Batya joining us from afar, and Rosemary and Terry and all the guests. Now, what I'm going to present to you is complicated responses to the destruction of the Jews. I am starting. Okay. I'm starting with a quote from Aurelia Wyleżynska, who was a Polish woman writer who lived in Paris, came back to Warsaw in 1937 when she felt that there was a danger, that the war was approaching, and she was the one of the righteous, even though she was not granted the righteous because she died in the first days of the Polish uprising. She was also in the underground. But let's look at what she says about the Poles. For many Poles, the destruction of the ghetto removed the anxiety of having the Jews as rivals in future Poland. The moral epidemic is spreading. We cannot escape epidemics, I guess. The moral epidemic is spreading despite everything. The air is full of pollutants that the weaker individuals absorb. She is presenting to us definitely the picture that we have, that really the larger population of Poland was not against the destruction of the Jews. On the contrary, there was a lot of support and approval, if not actual collaboration with the. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is too complicated. It was not always that simple, especially with the intellectuals, with Polish intellectuals. I am presenting to you now two very well-known pre-war writers, Zofia Kosak-Szczucka and Stanisław Rembek. These were writers whose background is very similar, even though Zofia was much more notable than Rembek. But they both represent the Weltanschauung of Poland in the 30s, meaning very devout Catholics, very devout Polish patriots, okay, and very, very anti-Semitic personalities and ideas, okay? So what I'm going, now, the question that the question that I'm asking, what did they do when at the time of the war, of the extermination of the Jews, when both of them could see what was happening? But let me start very quickly to present the extent of the anti-Semitism that they projected. So let us look very quickly at Kosak's pre-war perception of Polish Jews. In 1936, I am underlining here and bolding here, Jews are foreign, unpleasant to us, different race, repellent by the Oriental vehemence, quarrelsome disposition. There is a suspicious qualities that are suspicious for generation. There is the Jewish deluge and the solution to the Jewish problem. Nothing is more urgent. Now look, it's 36, okay? We have repetition of almost of it in 37. Jews are the major problem of the Polish entity. The Polish entity, which is the Catholic, if you could see the church, they're fighting against the church, the Catholic special standing of the Polish church. The Polish church was considered to be the daughter of the church in Rome, and because of the partitions of Poland, which means you know, I cannot get too much in history, but Poland lost for 124 years its independence because it was divided between the Habsburg Empire, between the German Empire and the Russian Empire. The situation of the Poles is a very special one. They have special messianic destiny. Okay, so that's the patriotism that Szczucka is communicating here, but also that Rembeck was believed in. Okay, so Rembeck, an example of his anti-Semitism it's already during the war, 1940, he describes the deportation of Jews from Grodzisko, which is it's a suburb, almost a suburb of Warsaw, and he says that the streets are empty, all the Jews were taken away, and the Poles, of course, are the ones who suffered. They got out of nothing, and the Jews managed to take everything with them, all the valuables. The town is empty. The absence is quite advantageous for the economic situation. So we even at 1940, when Jews are deported, he's still communicating this negative view of the Jews. Okay, so now let us look at, and during the war, let's look at this very quickly. According to the rumors of deportation, so let's look at this. So on the one hand, he's communicating what is happening to Jews. They are taken to Treblinka. We know what Treblinka was. Okay, then he's talking about the trains that go from Częstochowa. Okay, to extermination. At the same time, look at the language. It is rumored. Supposedly, the Jews were finished. Supposedly, apparently. In other words, on the one hand, he's communicating in his diary what is happening to Jews. On the other hand, there is some doubt about it. He cannot wholeheartedly participate or identify with the horror that he sees in front of him. Like, look at the glass of water. They were begging for water, and nobody responded to the Jews' plight. Okay, now what we see. This is, I need the next one. Okay, so now I'm getting into something that is really, it really intrigued everybody that knew about Cossacks, anti-Semitism before the war, and her response to the Jewish plight that she was seeing. So what she's talking about here, okay, first of all, let me tell you, this is a pamphlet that was produced by the underground, Polish underground, and was disseminated among all the factions of the underground. And he talks about the deportation of the Jews in 1942 to Treblinka. Okay, so what she's saying, I just want to. Okay, so what she's saying here, the world beholds this crime more terrifying than any in the past. Look at this, and keep silent. We, Catholic Poles, do speak out. Okay, Catholic Poles, you remember I just talked about Poles, the most devout Catholics, the daughter of Rome, and Poles, the messianic destiny of the persecuted Poles, historically persecuted Poles who lost their motherland. At the same time, we will consider Jews enemies of Poland. This, however, does not release us from the duty to condemn the crime. God demands that we protest. Christian conscience demands it. Every creature calling itself human merits neighborly love. So even though the Jews are the enemies of Poland, okay, even though they are the enemies of Poland, still they merit neighborly love. And let's look at this paragraph. The dreadful, there is a dreadful conviction that the murder of fellow human beings is permissible. Those who refuse to understand are neither Catholics nor Poles. Okay, so my thesis is emerging. Okay, we don't like the Jews. They are enemies of Poland. However, and this in this particular situation, if we do not find the caritas, the misericordia, the love of the neighbors in our souls, we are neither Catholics nor Poles. So look at what she's doing here. She's predicating the chosenness of the Polish people on the treatment of Jews under those circumstances, okay? And let me move to Quos. In 1947, he publishes a novel, The Sentence of Franciscus Quos, in which he talks about the Quos, a Polish policeman who is on hunting expedition which consists on finding and murdering Jews. The murder, sorry, I messed it, okay. And then the murder, okay, I'm not even need to read it, how horrible it, how realistically horrible it is. He shoots the two children and they are so drunk that they could not even see. Now, in the same novel, this Quos said, I mainly killed Jews. What is the answer of the priest to whom he comes for confession? God Almighty said, do not kill, not even your enemy. And Jesus Christ said, love your enemies. But look what he is doing here. Jesus himself was of this nation as well as Holy Mother and the apostles. Okay, so he's bringing Jesus and his Jewishness in order to convince this, in order to convince this murderer of the Jews that what he's doing is against the teaching of Jesus. So now let me conclude. Even though they continued to despise Jews, both Kossak-Szczucka and Rembek echoed Wyleżynska. You remember Wyleżynska, who talked about the anti-Semitic behavior of the Poles toward Jews, even at the time of the extermination. Echoed Wyleżynska condemnation of Polish participation in and approval of the destruction of the Jews. However, this condemnation did not emanate from a change of heart in view of the horror of the Jewish extermination, but rather out of concern for the sense of moral superiority of their fellow Poles, the sense that the moral superiority of fellow Poles remain intact. The writers saw the fulfillment of the commandment of love for Jews would not, they claim that the fulfillment of the commandment of love for the Jews would not only have defied the German enemy, it would also have affirmed Polish Catholic authenticity. Thus, the writer analyzed here reveal a twist in the sublimation of the hatred of Jews. The suspension of animosity toward Jews at the time of the Holocaust was necessary to serve the moral and religious soul of the Polish people. In other words, the redemption of the Polish people was predicated upon their opposition to the German violence against Jews. Now, this proposition raises the issue of the politics of emotion, but I'm not getting there. I hope maybe there will be some time in the question and answer time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, very much. This is, as most of the topics on the Holocaust, very complicated. Nothing is simple. And you've shown how complicated it is in Poland and how the Catholic Church try to deal with it.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping in time.
I was in time. Okay, good.
So Batya, it's your turn. Unmute yourself, Batya.
Okay. Can you see that? Okay, thank you. In the large corpus of Holocaust artworks, they are presentations of women's experiences of humiliation, abuse, and sexual violence during the Holocaust. The artists who created them are Holocaust survivors, artists born during the Holocaust years outside of Europe, second and third generation descendants of Holocaust survivors, and others. Works of art created during and right after the Holocaust by Holocaust victims are an authentic documentary expression of the events of that era. Other artworks by non-survivors artists commemorate and reflect upon this violence and serve to inform viewers about a relatively unfamiliar part of history. Due to the limited time, I will address only to two subjects concerning violence against Jewish women during the Holocaust in visual arts. The first one will be the negation of femininity and identity by shaving women's hair and by dressing them in the striped prisoner uniform. Many women survivors of the Holocaust testified that a shaving of their hair in the camps was not only humiliating to them as human beings, but also unbearable negation of their femininity. Holocaust survivor Zofia Rosenstrauch, known later as Naomi Yudkovsky from Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot, drew 20 drawings right after her liberation from Auschwitz. In the drawing, New Arrivals, she portrayed the Jewish women undressed and their hair is shaved before going into the shower and getting their prisoners' uniform. The artists, they are depicted the beautiful hair the young girls had to emphasize the humiliation, the insult, and the deletion of personal identity. In her two untitled, Shosh Kormosh, Israeli second generation, used the image of hair and combs to describe the female presence that was humiliated and destroyed during the Holocaust. She referred to the liberators' photographs of piles of hair that remained at the extermination campsites. Many other women survivors of the Holocaust testified that they lost their dignity, femininity, and identity when they were forced to wear the striped camp uniform. When Holocaust survivor Halina Olomotsky was a prisoner at Auschwitz-Birkenau, she succeeded in getting somewhat better food for survival thanks to her artistic talent. She drew women in Birkenau in 1945 while still in the camp. The drawing depicts women prisoners in striped uniform, again, humiliated and oppressed. They look emaciated, dressed in worn out prison garments and full of despair. In Daughters of Auschwitz, Muriel Helfman depicted 5 female Auschwitz inmates gathered close to each other, wearing striped uniform, some of them barefoot. The backdrop for the women is the famous Auschwitz gate with the German declaration, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. On the surface below, the artist added a passage from the Shacharit morning, a prayer for weekdays from the Hebrew prayer, Ve'ata nish'aru me'at meharbe. And now we were made a few from many. By adding the Auschwitz gate sign, Helfman referred to the perpetrators who humiliated, imprisoned, tortured, and oppressed these women. Moreover, by adding the Hebrew passage, she emphasized the victim's Jewish identity. Nechama Golan, Israeli second generation, refers to the symbolic meaning of the imprisonment in the camp from a direct feminine point of view in her installation, Striped Garment. By presenting an empty striped garment, she dealt with the imprisonment, degradation, and negation of womanhood that women experienced during the Holocaust. The footprint on the board below belongs to the artist expressing her identification with the female victims. Immediately after the Holocaust, many photographs were published in newspapers, magazines, and even in film journals. The impact of these Holocaust photographs was intense, and some artists responded to them, copied them, and adapted them and integrating them into their iconography and personal style. Among the many Holocaust photographs were those that show the humiliation, cruelty, and sexual violence against women. There are artists which used a photograph of a specific event from the Holocaust to deal with the sexual abuse of Jewish women. For example, the famous photographs from the Lvov pogrom, the consecutive massacre of Jews lived there, perpetrated in June-July 1941 by the Ukrainian mob and encouraged by the German occupation forces. In Pogrom, Helfman copied from the photograph the running, frightened, helpless, and screaming Jewish woman wearing only a slip and pursued by 2 young boys in uniform. The boy on the right is holding a club in his hand, and they are trying to catch the woman under the blessing of the swastika. The artist added a Hebrew quotation above the scene from Lamentation, Tzod tzaduni katzipor, oivai chinam. They hunted me like a bird. They are my enemies without cause. It seems that Holocaust survivor Boris Lowy was also influenced by this photograph. In Corset with the Stars of David, he refers directly to both female victim and his own Jewish identity by adding the yellow Jewish badge on the large corset colored in red to refer the blood as a result of violence, and yellow reminiscent of the Jewish yellow badge. The cement star of David hanging from the corset with chains emphasizes the imprisonment of the Jews in ghettos, camps, and camps during the Holocaust. Although Racheli Rogel relied on the same photograph as Hellman and Lowy, her artistic approach is symbolic rather than descriptive. She portrayed a white slip reminiscent of what the woman in the photograph was wearing. Screaming skulls, I hope you can see that here. Screaming skulls are scattered on the scarlet red background. A closer look reveals small hands tagging at the slip as if they are about to attack it. I will conclude with the second subject of depicting sexual violence against Jewish women during the Holocaust. It includes a continuum of sexual abuse, such as physical sexual humiliation, sexual slavery, sex as a means of survival, and rape. Holocaust survivor Zev Porat was in the Janowska concentration camp, where the Nazis assigned him to work as a draftsman. During his task as a slave laborer, he could see what was happening from the window. In his drawing, Tortures, he described how the Nazis undressed, tortured, and killed the Jewish women. Porat depicted the camp square where the naked Jewish women were gathered in groups with an armed Nazi guarding them. In front of these women, a group of murdered naked women is lying on the ground. In the foreground, on the right, the artist described a scene of torture. A naked woman is tied to a stake, and the Nazi guard is kicking her head and torturing her with a whip. This is an authentic and rare description of the abuse and murder of Jewish women. Rachel Yosef, Israeli second generation, also refers to the suffering, humiliation, and rape of the women victims through her mother's private situation. In a series Homage to Mother, she copes with fragments of information about sexual abuse that her mother experienced during the Holocaust. A year after her mother died, she created this series of prints. In the first work that we see, a naked woman is seen lying on the floor, her legs apart, and a large blood stain spreading around her. The abdominal area is featured to hint at the potential consequences of the recent rape. On the top left is a roaring male wolf with an erect penis, a description that transmits power, control, and aggression. The choice of the wolf to describe the Nazis is based on the image of the wolf in the German culture. The second work repeats almost the same description. However, this time the stain of blood has increased, spread, and violently covers most of the artwork. On the left side are two wolves, one under the other, with a lower wolf standing between the legs of the naked woman on the floor. On the upper right are the words, and I quote, "The German shouted at her," it's in Hebrew, The German shouted at her to climb high on the table, and she, so it seems to her, heard softness in his voice. End of quotation. Adding the two wolves increases the sense of violence and humiliation and suggests group rape. The inscriptions echoed a scene engraved in the memory of the artist since her childhood. This work emphasizes the polarity between the female victim, a helpless Jewish woman, and the powerful male and Nazi aggressor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Batya, for this very painful presentation. And you're right, in all the things that I've read, I really have not read much at all about women specifically suffering these two subjects, sexually and otherwise. So thank you very much for opening our eyes to it. Teryl, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. I will share my screen. And begin. It is commonly presumed that the experience of music during the Shoah, composing it, performing it, and listening to it, served as a source of hope and inspiration and resistance. However, the musical experience is much more nuanced and problematic. It has the power to return and haunt us, even wound us. Employing the Dachau concentration camp as an exemplar, I suggest that the musical experience within the Shoah provided feelingful sonic experiences that, depending on intention and perception, it's my thesis, traveled the emotional gamut between uplift and shame, elevation and trauma. So I will interrogate the SS's implementation of music as an instrument in violence in Dachau, and theorize the traumatic impact such as musical experiences. The damage inflicted by music in this specific violent context was catastrophic, both physically and emotionally, precisely because of music's cultural value and emotional power as received by the captive listener performer victims. The SS's intent was not only to destroy the victims physically, but also to annihilate entirely their human subjectivities. Music was their weapon of choice. Dachau was the first concentration lager, KZ, the flagship in the carceral system that became a permanent feature of the Nazi state. It was established in 1933 by SS leader Heinrich Himmler and located on the site of a decommissioned munitions factory. Dachau was the first, and as I said, the flagship of this carceral system that became a permanent feature of the Nazi state. Its second commandant, Theodor Eiche, created and institutionalized a savage training curriculum for SS personnel and a regimen of brutal punishments for prisoners. Rudolf Höss, the former commandant of Auschwitz and a graduate of Dachau, describes Theodor Eiche and his pedagogy. He is to be seen as the real creator of the concentration camps. He was also the person who gave the concentration camps their form and appearance. To him, the inmates are always enemies of the state and who have to be kept locked up, treated harshly, and, in the event of resistance, annihilated. In this spirit, he teaches and educates his SS leaders. So, AJS weaponized music as a fundamental component of Dachau's daily rituals. Music was more tightly woven into the fabric of Dachau than any other KZ. AJS established ruthless practices in which music was deployed as part and parcel of its systemic subsequent violence. In the landscape of Dachau, its sonic landscape, almost every camp inmate was inescapably confronted in one way or another with music in the course of his or her camp imprisonment. The SS weaponization of music occurred as music on command, which included forced singing, forced listening, and forced instrumental music performance. Because of time, I'm going to limit my discussion to forced listening and forced singing. The manner in which the musical experience, as it is typically constructed, and as we understand it as a positive and uplifting experience, was turned on its head. Soon after Dachau recommissioning in 1933, the SS installed loudspeakers at multiple sites within the camp, including the cafeteria and one on top of the shunt room. The speakers were connected to radio lines and often a gramophone. It was through the SS appropriation and deployment of then current sound reproduction technologies that the prisoners were primarily subjected to forced listening. It was impossible to escape the sonic assault of the loudspeaker system. The recorded music that blared throughout the camp consisted of a nationalistic and patriotic nature, chauvinistic Nazi parody songs, marches, and of course, classical music by approved Germanic composers, including Richard Wagner, Johann Strauss the Elder and Younger, and other composers who were German. I'm sorry, here we go. I'm sorry, I'm having some unanticipated problems. Here we go. So this was the Baden-Weiler March, which was Hitler's personal march and often broadcasted at Dachau. Ostensibly, music was intended as part of the SS plan to, quote, re-educate Dachau's political prisoners to instill in them the noble German values they were supposedly missing. The SS also began using recorded music at Dachau during interrogations and torture in order to camouflage the sounds of beatings and the screams of their victims. In addition to forced listening, forced singing on the parts of prisoners was thoroughly woven into the fabric of Dachau's daily rituals, particularly in collective singing during roll calls, marching to and from slave labor details, and during so-called physical exercises and heavy labor. The singing had to be performed precisely and as loudly as possible. Prisoners could be forced to sing individually. Anyone with a modicum of power at Dachau, from capo to commandant, could order a prisoner or groups of prisoners to sing. The physical effort that it took on the parts of Dachau's prisoners to endure forced singing clearly took its toll. Most notably, as this quote from a survivor mentions, the eventual inability to produce a sound. The prisoners were rendered literally voiceless. This is a tune, one of the major tunes that the prisoners were forced to sing. They were commanded to sing these patriotic songs, German folk songs with countrified or naive texts, songs having texts that were often considered obscene, or songs that the prisoners themselves loved, such as church hymns. A prime example is O Deutschland hoch in Ehren. So we can, the effect of the lyrics on the prisoners being forced to sing this tune was incredibly traumatic. So in Dachau, the SS practices of forced listening and singing demonstrate exquisitely their ability to weaponize music with calculated surgical precision. The roots of the camp's deployment of music can be found in its adherence to militarized practices and rituals, instituted to erase individual differences to produce conformity, obedience, and order. In Dachau, the SS weaponized music to tear down prisoners physically, as well as their sense of will and human agency, enhancing the damage already inflicted upon their starved and brutally overworked bodies. Forced listening and singing was life-threatening on multiple levels. So why weaponize music? These musical experiences perverted all cultural norms and values in regard to music. The SS deployed music to break down the communal aspect of music making and destroy the musical identities of the prisoners. The sonic landscape that they endured on a daily basis was mind-numbing, intimidating, humiliating, and degrading. The SS weaponized music at Dachau to annihilate prisoners on every possible level, physically, psychologically, spiritually, thus dehumanizing them through a cherished art form that is intrinsic to human culture, identity, and emotion. The SS weaponization of music at Dachau thus fractured the musical experience. The damage inflicted upon its prisoners was particularly egregious precisely because of music's cultural value and emotional power. Nazi SS engaged in what music critic Alex Ross describes as musical sadism. They were content not only to destroy their victims physically, but also to erase their human subjectivities in their entirety. These practices at Dachau metastasized across the entire KZ system throughout the time of the Shoah. Comprehending the role that the Nazis performed in transforming music into yet another means of violence cries out for further inquiry. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Teryl, so much. This is all news to me, I have to say, because I think that most of us associate music of the Holocaust with Theresienstadt and it being a kind of resistance and so on. This is all new. So I'm sure that Rosemary will address this, but in the meantime, I just want to thank the three of you for giving us very, very interesting presentations, and there's a lot more to learn, and I know your papers are much longer and explain a whole lot more. So Rosemary, it is yours now.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree with Michlean. In some ways, our panel today is really groundbreaking. And I want to discuss the panel in what might be called a turn to the humanities. What I mean is that as I see it, through their exploration of representations of violence in the arts, the panelists broaden our understanding of violence by including the humanities in all discussions of violence. And as such, your findings extend and build on the work of social scientists who generally are foregrounded in these discussions of violence. That's the first point I want to make. The second is, through your engagement of a various set of critical methodologies, each panelist demonstrates the ways in which humanities may offer fresh insights into complex issues. Rachel uses discursive practices, Batya, figurative ones, and Teryl, humanistic values. So this shows how critical methodologies can expand our insights. So what I want all of us all the panelists to consider is, given the turn towards the humanities, as I've defined it with representations of violence, take a minute, please, to consider how your work fits in or can fit in into the body of scholarship focusing on the relationship between violence and its representation. And I asked this question, like I said, because I think it's really groundbreaking. The idea of music, that, as Teryl described it, totally undermines the usual discussions of music. And I think the art and discursive practices that Rachel and Batya looked at do as well. So what do you think in terms of the larger scholarship, humanities, and not just social sciences? So maybe, Michlean, we can take some other questions while our panelists are considering this new kind of frame that I'm presenting to you.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I would like to ask a question of Teryl again, which has to do with the notion that we all held until now, that music was a form of resistance, that music was a way for escapism. And actually, I personally know of an interview that was done with a relative of mine about music in Theresienstadt, and how she felt that she was honored when she was able to get a ticket to any one of the concerts, and how uplifting it was to have this change. And is this Dachau report something that's been discovered recently, or just not talked about much?
Such great questions. A lot of the work has been done over in Germany and with Polish scholars, and it doesn't seem to have really made its way over here. One of the primary thinkers about this is Guido Fackler, who's a German scholar, historian, and musician as well. Also Shirley Gilbert, who's in Great Britain, has done quite a bit on it and pushing against the notion of music as resistance. And I think what, when I came across this and started putting this idea together, is the notion of intent and how music is instrumentalized and weaponized. There's also a group of musicologists in the United States who are studying music as a weapon, how the United States government has deployed music as a weapon at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, this type of thing. So I think it's a matter of Another scholar, Pamela Potter at UW-Madison, has written about music as being the most German of the arts. And so in my work, I didn't get to it in this paper, but there's an irony in that the Germans value music so much that they knew exactly how to deploy it in a way that perverted it and turned it on its head. And because, you know, two people could sing the same song, one, say, for instance, a lullaby to comfort themselves, or children. Ilse Weber did this in Theresienstadt, brilliant singer and artist. But that same lullaby, if forced to sing this in Dachau or Auschwitz to cover up a particular, you know, type of interrogation or torture, it's a diabolical flip on its head. So I think it's intention, and then how the audience receives it as well. I don't know if that helps, but.
I have another question. You had the Strausses listed as German music, but I thought that the Germans, the Nazis, thought of them as Jews because they did have some Jewish ancestry.
Yeah, that was really interesting because, for instance, they put Mendelssohn on the degenerate music list, but not the Strausses. So that bears some more, study. But yeah.
Interesting. We have a question from Marcy Picat, and this is for Batya. And the question was, how have you found the differences between survivors' visual art versus second generation expressions?
Thank you. Actually, I need to divide the art of the survivors in two groups. The first group is artworks done during the Holocaust, depicting what they experienced and what they saw. And this art has two aims. One, to leave evidence to what happened, and the other is to feel when they drew or when they painted, they felt that they fight against the dehumanization. And the second group is artworks by survivors after the Holocaust, and they naturally expressed their experience. Again to show what happened to them. As for the second generation and also third generation, it's a second-hand experience, second-hand information, and they can add their attitude to the occurrence during the Holocaust. And they also can choose their own style, which was very difficult for for Holocaust survivors to do, since they had limited sources, and also they were in danger when they drew without permission. And again, here you have to divide the artworks that made in the order of the Nazis or the Judenrat, and the underground creation, and they were under danger of death all the time. So I hope I answered you.
Just for your information, I think it's very interesting that the Holocaust Museum in Washington does not collect any art other than the art of people who drew during the Holocaust. They don't accept anything by second or third generation, and they don't even accept art that is not Holocaust related that was done by survivors. So they limit it completely to art that was done during the Holocaust or after the Holocaust if it was about Holocaust experience.
They are very strict.
Yes.
But
any other questions? Oh, sorry. This is from Bettina Hoffman. In Dachau, there were also many German anti-Nazi prisoners incarcerated. Maybe the music was used to educate them or brainwash them to install proper German patriotism into them that they supposedly lacked.
Yeah, part of it was part of this political re-education as well, definitely. That was part of it.
But then it carried on to the Jewish prisoners, is that what you're saying?
Everybody was subjected to it. Once you were brought into the camp, the loudspeakers were going, the music was going daily, and everybody was expected to sing as a collective, especially at gathering in the appel, the roll call at the beginning of the day, the end of the day. Everybody was forced to sing these tunes as they marched to slave labor, as they marched coming back. Everybody was forced to listen to this music because it was happening in the cafeteria where they ate, where at night. So it was inescapable, and you could be ordered immediately, individually or in groups, small groups, to sing a song. And sometimes the prisoners felt that they had a little bit of agency and choice in choosing a song when they were commanded individually, but they still had to choose something to please whoever is forcing them to sing. So it really wasn't an expression of human agency. But this is completely divorced from the music that was going on, in private groups, in the barracks, and on the, in their own private lives.
What you said, I think that you said that this happened in many other camps. Am I right? So was
yes.
Theresienstadt a unique experience because of the Nazis' desire to have it an exemplary camp that they could show off how wonderful they were, and they made a resort for the Jews? Is that correct to assume?
Theresienstadt is it's a completely different experience and setting than like the KZ lager. I know that the Holocaust Museum in DC classifies it at more of a ghetto. And so it was an entirely different type of situation. But I think also in the first and second Aufbau Kommando, some of the top musicians from Prague were sent to Terezin, Gideon Klein and others who started that musical life. And things progressed to where the SS thought they could harness that as propaganda. And so, but it's an entirely different situation.
The argument among scholars continues what to call Theresienstadt, because at ghetto, it was not. I mean, the definition of a ghetto is totally different.
Right.
And as you said, I think that it was unique among the camps.
Yeah, it served so many different purposes.
Yeah. So we have another question here, whether the Holocaust Museum doesn't bring fine art into their curation, since presumably they see anything other than pure documentation work to be not honest to the experience of the camps? And I think the answer in some way perhaps is space, simply because of space. Those of you who've been to the Holocaust Museum and have seen the exhibits, that is 5% of what the museum has. 95% is in storage. And I think that if they opened it up to second and third generation, or to the general art of some artists, I know several artists who were survivors and their art is amazing, but has nothing to do with the Holocaust. One of them, the museum was willing to accept in order to sell at an auction, but not to keep and make money that way. But otherwise, as I said, they don't accept it. And there's a question for Dr. Brutin. Can you speak more about 2G artwork, your ongoing research in that area?
Can you repeat it?
The question is whether you can speak more about 2G artwork, your research of second generation art.
You know, it is divided in periods. At the beginning, of course, the research focused on the Holocaust survivor artists. And later on, especially from the 80s, the research focuses on a second generation, and from 2000 and on, it focuses on third generation already. That means it's periodically. Did I answer the question?
Can you speak a bit about how that has changed from 2G to 3G to third generation, how that artwork has shifted? I know it's more distant, but has the form?
Not necessarily, not necessarily.
Okay, I'd love to hear you speak about that.
I think that at the beginning, we can see that the second generation continue the same topics, subjects, as the first generation, but then they started to deal with issues concerning their feeling, their situation, and naturally the artworks looks much more artistic in terms of techniques that we cannot see at the first generation artworks. And definitely it is totally different from the first generation. They deal with topics like what they would have done if they were there, or they are hunted by ghosts. Ghost means those dead from their extended family. Things like this, or how the Auschwitz number on their parents' forearm affected them, or the striped uniform that usually the parents hide from them and revealed it after the Icon trial. So you see that they have different subject to deal with.
Batya, if you're interested, I can send you a link to an exhibit by two local Washington artists who are second generation, and it might interest you.
Thank you, yes.
We have another question, but Rosemary, there are still a few minutes. I wondered whether you wanted to say something else.
Sorry, can you put the link in the into the chat for everybody?
Yeah.
Of the Washington artists, I mean.
Oh,
okay, sure. Rosemary?
Well, no, you have a question from Jeffrey Wallen. Why don't you take that from the attendee? You see Jeffrey's question?
Yeah, so Margaret, Huber Newman, in her really interesting book about being in both the Gulag and the camps, talks about music being played on Sundays during the early years at Ravensbrück. She writes, I gladly put up with the numerous military marches and the dreadful soldier songs in return for Schubert, Mozart, and Beethoven from time to time.
And that's the paradox of the musical experience, depending on that it's individual to every person, especially how she's receiving that. And so, yeah, it's just so complicated because how it was used and how people are receiving that. And especially, you know, when those are programmed on the same concert. So it's fascinating.
I think
It
that
also
word
has to do with different.
complicated in a way summarizes your presentations. Nothing simple when you discuss the Holocaust. There are always opposing views, interesting views, and more input. So
Yeah, I
if
was
there's
just going to add briefly that it also depended at what moment in time, like at Ravensbrück, the prisoners were treated much better in the very early years than later on. So this was something that she's remarking about when she first got there in 40, 41, 42, and that changed greatly, you know, afterwards.
It's situated, highly situated. Yeah.
So we never directly sort of addressed the question that I posed to you about violence and the humanities and the insights from humanities. So, but I did want to say, I see so many connections between what the humanities can offer to understanding of violence that are really underexplored and underappreciated. So I just wanted to maybe give you that as direction for future research.
and for future papers, Rose.
And for future papers, of course, yeah.
Well, I hope everybody will stay well throughout this pandemic and that hopefully next year we'll be able to see each other in person, not just virtually. So one more question. I'm interested in studying and bridging the visual arts with Jewish studies. I'm a new graduate student and was wondering if anyone could recommend where the future of these studies is going.
Oh. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Well, all the best, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Hanukkah.
Thank you.
And hopefully 2021 will be a much, much better year for everyone and everywhere.
Okay, and Marcia, you want to reach out to me and we can talk about that question that you just posed.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, your name is Rosemary. Okay, thank you.
Horowitz, yeah.
Okay, thank you, I will.
Thank you so much for.
And Michlean, thank you to you as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for being there for us. We really needed you just to calm us down.
It was a great session. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Amy.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye-bye. Be well.
Great.
Bye.
It was great.
Thank you.